Right, thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Newsnight, coming to you live from the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Ngozi Alebu.
And I am Christian Ogodo.
Members of the National Assembly are insisting on the amendments made to the 2022 appropriation bill, including, of course, the reduction of allocation to over 10,000 projects and insertions of over 6,000 new projects. The lawmakers say by the power of appropriation conferred on the National Assembly by the Constitution, the Parliament has the right to tinker with the federal government's budget proposals like any other bill. They say the changes made and the response by President Muhammadu Buhari shows that the legislature is not a rubber stamp of the executive, as being alleged by Nigerians.
Buhari had on Friday, while signing into law the 2022 appropriation bill and the 2021 finance bill, expressed strong reservations on the worrisome changes made by the National Assembly to the federal government's budget. He argued that the cuts in the provisions of several of these projects by the National Assembly might render the projects unimplementable or set back their completion, especially some of these administration's strategic capital projects. The president declared that he will send the request to the National Assembly for an amendment to be made. Buhari's objection has now led to a fresh debate on the powers of the National Assembly to tinker with budget proposals laid before it by the executive.
Right, to help us understand some of the issues involved in the budgeting process, we're joined by long-serving Senator Ita Enang, who is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs. And we also have Arise analyst and lawyer Frank Tietie to discuss some of the legal issues. Let me begin. Thank you both gentlemen for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Well, the question of whether the National Assembly has a right to insert or to remove is being on the front burner of national discourse. But is it a case, Ita Enang, is it a case of much ado about nothing, with the president raising very, very serious objections, to the insertions of up to 6,000 projects by the National Assembly, and still went ahead to sign off on that appropriation bill?
Thank you very much. I think it is, we can't say it is much ado about nothing. One thing that we need to understand first is that there is no dispute or misunderstanding between the executive and the legislature. They are working together, they are on the same page, and disagreements of this nature are permanently normal in any executive-legislative relations, and it is not a quarrelsome situation. His Excellency Mr. President has a right, and within his powers, in assenting to the budget, to draw attention to reservations he has, which he will present to prepare the mind of the legislature. The intent is to prepare the mind of the legislature that, look, I will be sending in an amendment, and these are my reservations about it. And this has to be considered on the in view of the fact that the president could, on that score and on that ground, withhold assent. Mr. President says, and as it is very reasonable, that I will sign it so that we can keep faith with the January to December budget. And I will sign it so that we will begin implementation of this budget from January 1. Now, don't forget that this is a deficit budget to a large extent, and that the funding of this budget, a great part of it comes from loans. And most of these loans, as the National Assembly approved, is tied to specific projects. Part on power, part on the transportation, part on the work sector, part on other areas.
Yeah,
and the national...
sorry if I can quickly comment there on the issue of funding. The president raised an objection saying some of those insertions, the National Assembly was not able to explain exactly how they were going to fund, these projects.
That's what I'm saying, that most of a great part of the funding is going to come from loans. And Mr. President had sent the request on some of these loans project tied. And so if they were project tied, as they were, and if after approving the loans, you'll still have to approve those projects in the budget itself. And it is saying, look, if you reduce the amount, we are not going to be able to execute this project and complete it in time to be able to regenerate the revenue that is supposed to come from there so that we can repay the loan within the tenor. If you reduce reduce this amount, it will help, it will set back the implementation and we may be in default. So that is why Mr. President said, look, I will send these amendments, I will send a request for amendment and virement to enable you consider. And I'm conscious, I'm very confident that unlike a few times we had in times past where there were agreements to sign, assent to it, send an amendment. And when that amendment was sent, it was packed. And then the implementation went on and the legislature did not. I know this is a very cooperative legislature between the executive and the president, and we're not going to have that situation. Okay. Because they're working together. There is no question of rubber stamp. They are understanding and they're all working in the interest of the nation. Okay, Senator Ita Enang, let's seek a legal perspective to this from Arise News analyst Frank Tietie. Do you think that if the president goes ahead, even before sending an amendment bill to the National Assembly and implements what he thinks the federal government revenue can carry, will his action be ultra-vires? Would it be null and void? Would it have been against, the act, the Budget Act?
All right, thank you very much. And first of all, my respect to distinguished Senator Ita Enang, a very fantastic and patriotic lawmaker. And then also to deal with your question directly, there is no doubt about the powers of the National Assembly to make the budget law, which is called the Appropriation Act. Again, there is nothing wrong when, irrespective of the fact that the president expressed his reservations before signing to law the 2022 Appropriation Act. But there are a lot of issues, a whole lot of issues. The president has shown a lot of maturity because this is what we would have described in the Dogara and Abdul Mumin's Jubril's saga as padding, nothing more, nothing less. This is padding by the National Assembly. The worrisome thing here is that there is a seeming synergy in understanding, just like the distinguished Senator Ita Enang said. If the reason why we had padding saga, padding quarrels and accusations and counter-accusations in the National Assembly with particular reference to the House of Representatives was simply because it was done secretly. This time around, there is a sense of unity among all the members of the Senate and the the House of Representatives in agreeing as to insertions. Now, that is problematic because the National Assembly doesn't have such whimsical powers according to a law that it made itself. It doesn't have such whimsical and wide powers to just begin to insert or remove projects because it is the executive that has the indices. Because, again, there is a law referred to as the Fiscal Responsibility Act made by the National Assembly, to which budgets, yearly budgets in our country are presented in the National Assembly, not as a result, based on very, I would say, very scientific and advanced understanding of the economy. And based on the Fiscal Strategy paper, according to Section 11 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which also recommends that annual budgets be based on the medium-term expenditure framework. So the members of the National Assembly are actually operating in a very strange style because it is the executive that knows where it will get money. It's the executive that determines the projects that are implementable, that will be useful to the citizens of Nigeria. But members of the National Assembly, for political reasons and for some strange uneconomic, considerations, we begin to insert projects and tinker with a budget proposals that the president did not submit on his own, not basically on political considerations alone, but strictly on economic indices based on the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So what has happened is the National Assembly is directly involved in padding, and the president has simply matured over the years, having suffered a lot from the crisis that existed between the speaker, the former speaker Dogara, and the former Appropriations Committee chairman of the House Committee chairman Abdulmuni Jibril. What is happening is that there seem not to be, the president doesn't just unnecessarily want to rock the boat. Again, directly answering you, yes, the president, for the sake of peace, which is unusual, because one would have expected the president to actually put up a challenge. Why would we have this kind of a charade? Why would the president just accept these unnecessary insertions that don't have justification, that he knows full well that the National Assembly is playing to the gallery, playing to the fact that you don't know where money is coming from and they want to appropriate where money should go, even though it is their constitutional responsibility, but is guided by the act. The president ought to have challenged it, but he also is very much in order when he decides to send a supplementary appropriation act or an amendment bill. A supplementary appropriation bill or an amendment bill to the effect. So I think Ngozi's question as to the distinguished Senator Ita Enang as to whether there is much ado about nothing may just be it, because all of this rigmarole may end up to the fact that if you understand government, it is only when there is money you can spend it. So go ahead and put all sorts of things you want to put in the budget just because you want to satisfy some political whims and caprices. It is only when the president and his team decide that there is money, that is when they can only implement such things.
All right, great. Very, very quickly, Senator Ita Enang, you heard him there. There's this, lovey-dovey relationship between the legislature and the executive. But how much of that is really, for the good of Nigerians? And this padding by another name, according to Tietie, seems to have been going on even before the Buhari administration, but it has been consistent since 2015. 2016, 20 billion. 2021, you had about 505 billion added to that budget. But you know what? I'll allow us come back from this short break, and then I'll, expand on that question and allow you to respond. All right, thanks for staying with us. You're still watching Newsnight, coming to you live from the nation's capital, Abuja. Our guest is distinguished Senator Ita Enang, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs, and Frank Tietie is Arise News Analyst. Thank you both, gentlemen, for helping us unpack all of this. Well, my question to you, distinguished Senator, earlier before we went on that break, this relationship between the legislature and the executive, how does it serve Nigerians? Let me just bring this example of the loans that have been approved so far, or let's even say just within 2 years, by the legislature for the president. About $49 billion have been approved in 2 years as at July of 2021. What's the place of separation of powers, checks and balances, in this government?
Now, before a loan request is made, projects are identified. And when you identify the project, you make a request for the loan. When that is done, while that is being done, you make that request and that known to the National Assembly, and that I am going to make the request of this money, and this is what I want to use it for. And by the time the fund is ready with the institution that is lending the fund, and then they have approval of the legislature, they will release the fund to you. Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that there is a kind of symbiotic relationship between the executive and the legislature, and the law requires that it is not the president that is taking the loan. It is not the legislature that is taking the loan. It is the Federal Republic of Nigeria that is taking the loan. And that being so, the executive and the legislature must agree. That is the most important thing. And they have always agreed, because each of these projects is spread all over the country. And each of these projects is necessary. And the only thing Nigerians should be worried about is, one, are the loans applied strictly to the project for which they were taken? Which is the reason why Mr. President said you have reduced from some of the capital projects the amount I projected, which is what ought to have completed the project for us to be in line with the loan request. Secondly, we should always ensure, when we are talking about not just loan we will take, but servicing the loan, that the loans we are servicing is serviced from the project and the source for which we took the loan to fund. So there is always this synergy. The other thing I want to say is this. There is always unanimity in the legislature. When you step on the floor of the Senate, the red chambers, it is one legislature. It doesn't matter PDP, APC. When you step on the green chamber of the House of Representatives, it is one legislature. No, it doesn't matter PDP, ANPP, or APC. So none of the political parties has ever objected to the loans because they consider the interests of the nation. Although immediately after approving, some persons from the one political party or the other will now issue a release without considering that, in fact, the chairman of both committees on loan, if I'm correct, that of the Senate is a PDP. So they never consider the question of political party, they consider national interest. So the question of loan is very much, Nigeria is very much on course and we don't have any challenge. That's what Mr. President is saying. Give me what I had asked for this project so that I can complete them and we start repayment.
All right. Very good juncture there to, put a break. I'm tempted to want to ask you another question because of your vast experience in the legislature, that is from the House of Representatives to the Senate and becoming the presidential liaison officer, or the special advisor, National Assembly to Mr. President and the rest, and say, most of these projects are said to be projects that are ordinarily domiciled in states to be funded by state governments and local governments. Why bring in the federal government to fund projects like drainage, like, boreholes, like ventilated, improved pit latrines and the rest? Why?
I think this is, I remember that in my years in the House of Representatives, I made this request for a particular road, and I still have a copy of the letter that the then Minister of Works wrote to me that the project is not a federal road. That is Chief Tony Aneni of blessed memory. He was Minister of Works then. Now, we had that problem in our time, and that was the beginning of constituency project. Now, the way we solved it was to talk of constituency project, and so that funds will be set aside, perhaps 100 billion, and we say the House of Representatives, you will take 60 billion. Senate, you will take 40 billion. And you will use you will give each amount to each of the senators to put their project and each member to put their project. You can then put project, whether it is a local government project or state-style project, then you can then put there. Okay. That was the summary and how we resolved that. But then there are times that you have projects that that overlaps. So, Mr. President, by drawing specific attention to this, is now bringing up a new narrative, which the legislature will have to take account of, because funds are shared in the country into three tiers of government. The local government has its own funds, and so it has its own project that it's supposed to do. The state government has its own funds, which it has projects under the concurrent legislative list to do. And then the federal government has its own project, exclusive and concurrent. And then it has its own project. So Mr. President is right to draw attention to this. And I know that this will guide the legislature in much of the further things. But definitely and finally, there is no dispute between executive and the legislature.
All right, point made. Frank Tietie, very quickly, if you can.
Thank you, Frank Tietie, for your compliment, and I appreciate you.
In 30 seconds, if you can,
eloquence.
Frank, do you think senators or lawmakers are under pressure when it comes to constituency projects? Is there a link between this and this insertions?
Oh yes, there is a whole lot of it, and it doesn't end there. There is a whole lot more politicking that goes into influencing members of the executive, particularly ministers, to ensuring that money is released and those projects are actually implemented. And that's the reason why a lot of corruption elements are drawn into these issues of constituency projects and budget padding, which we are now euphemizing as insertions. The president, I thought, should have actually expressed more, disagreement and and then objection to what the National Assembly has done. He wasn't under any legal obligation to sign the budget in a hurry in the manner he has done. There's no point, playing to the gallery. There's no point trying to just impress people, whereas no progress is being done. We have a law that says that budgets that we are going to make as a country in the next 3 years, we already have the figures as we speak. Those are the things that guide the preparation of budgets that are presented in the National Assembly. So why just insert things into them as if we don't have laws, or another country that has policies and rules to which we are expected to be compliant to?
Thank you so very much, Frank Tietie, a RISE analyst and a lawyer, and of course, Senator Ita Enang is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Niger Delta Affairs. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming to throw more light on the rocky or thorny issue of the budget 2022.